Welcome to the 12-Step Recovery Evolution podcast. Visit recoveryevolution.co.uk for more episodes, helpful resources and links to our social media. Also visit the site for information on how you can attend a future Zoom session or workshop live. Thank you.
Morning everyone. I'd like to thank everybody for turning up every day, because I can't imagine anybody's got any more out of this than I have, because I don't always get to do this, and so it's so nice just to get back and look at the big book, and because I've probably not read this chapter for maybe like 7 years, and so it's in your memory, but then you learn more over that period of time, and then with all that new knowledge and new understanding, then you go back and have a look at it again, and it's just so wonderful to me. And then you start sort of reading it and then thinking, oh, I'll tell them about this, I'll tell them about that. But there's so much. It's like, man, I've got to get back to a book study at some point, because it's just wonderful. So thanks everybody for turning up, because like I said, we carry the message to you, but I really acknowledge that how much I get out of this. And again, I know I would like you to think that everything I'm telling you I've known for years, but the truth is some of the things I've been saying is I've just kind of realising, it's like a new realisation. Again, that's what makes this programme so wonderful, that from the beginning of being willing to believe this, that my mind is just still opening, constantly still opening. And I'm just as excited today about it, and I'm just as blown away about it today as I was 30 years ago. So I wanted to share that, because it's also sort of poignant to, we're reading it, and I'm trying to present it in a way to help you new guys to realise, to get you to the beginning, because I think that beginning bit is an important part, and I think that beginning bit can get clouded, and it can get missed in the distressed state that we can find ourselves in, and the things that we that may rob us away from having a chance to get on this journey, because other things seem a bit more pressing. So you kind of notice that when you sponsor people over the years, you're always just trying to bring them back. They want to pull you into their problems, and you want to pull them into the solution. And so you don't mind listening to a bit of problems, but if we all just sit around talking about problems all the time, we're not going to feel very good, and we're not going to get anywhere. And that's not what I'm hoping for. I'm hoping to get somewhere with all of this. So we're looking at the chapter to the Agnostics, and that's on page 44 of the big book. I've kind of got a plan in my head. I want to get us to page 47, but I don't know whether that's going to happen. So the chapter to the Agnostics. Now, agnostics, I've wrote down the definition, is a person who believes that nothing is known or can be known about the existence or nature of God. Now, even having a look at that this morning, I thought, really, this chapter isn't just to the agnostics. It probably should be actually called the chapter to the agnostics / atheists / people that have a faith but it's not working for them, because it kind of addresses all of them group of people. So when I start reading it, it's saying, in the preceding chapters, we have learned something of alcoholism. We hope that we have made clear, and again, this is that bit that's important, that keeps cropping up, the distinction between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Now, it's not saying non-alcoholic as the person that doesn't drink. It's saying the person that drinks a lot, but they're non-alcoholic. It says, if when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely, or if when drinking you have little control over the amount you take, you are probably an alcoholic. If that be the case, you may be suffering from an illness which only a spiritual experience will conquer. So that's quite a statement there, I'd say. It's saying that well, obviously he's saying what he's saying. I just want to repeat it in a way of like, whoa, that's what he's saying. It's saying that You know, if you are an alcoholic of the variety that is talking of in this book, then what's your problem is that you've not been having a spiritual experience all your life, and that you need that spiritual experience to resolve the problem that you're. Remember, the alcohol isn't the problem, it's the manifestation of the problem, it's the symptom of the problem. So when you're powerless, how we can tell you're powerless is because your life's unmanageable. And so, but the unmanageability is not the problem, the unmanageability is the symptom of the problem. So, you know, it's nice to know that, because when you start to solve the problem and you start getting the power, you can start seeing the manageability. Now, I like to highlight that because often people say, well, my life's manageable when I drink. It's like, well, you don't pay your rent, someone else pays that. You ain't looking after your kids, someone else is doing that. You ain't going to work. These ain't judgments. These are just some of the symptoms. That the car that you're driving is paid for by your parents. And if they didn't wake you up in the morning and lie for you, you probably would have lost the job you got. So when people say that their life's manageable, I like to think that means by them. Because when you're surrounded by enablers, they tend to give you the illusion that your life's manageable. In our culture, we're such a strong welfare state. You can be given quite a lot of money and support, and give you drugs. They give you food. They give you everything. And then you can say, well, I've got this manageable life, but I think it means being manageable by you, that you've got the power to get your own job, get your own money, look after your own children, take care of your own issues. And, you know, again, we all have support in that, but you know what I mean? There's a point where, you know, it's like, well, you're not really managing. And if all of that support's taken away from you, you'd be going down the toilet pretty quick. So this illness is about this disconnection from the spirit. So we need this spiritual experience will conquer. So that's quite an extreme statement. I don't think anyone's ever gone into a doctor's office and, you know, and he's gone, oh, drinking too much, I feel really depressed and I'm homeless and all the rest of it. And the doctor's gone, what you need is a spiritual experience, mate. They seem to think it's a Valium deficiency by the look of it. So it says, to one who feels that he is atheist and agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. And again, I think that's where the God bit obviously causes a lot of issues for a lot of people. So he's trying to address that and saying that in the AA way, that shouldn't necessarily be a problem for you. They're trying to make this work for everybody. But again, I'm more of a God, a religious member. I didn't start that way, and I did have a belief when I come in. It wasn't a good belief, but we'll get into that a little bit more as we go. It says, to one who feels he is agnostic or atheist or agnostic, such an experience seems impossible. But to continue as he is means disaster, especially if he is an alcoholic of the hopeless variety. To be doomed to an alcoholic death or to live on spiritual principles are not always easily alternatives to face. Now, again, when you even take this back to sort of 1930s when it was written, there wasn't a lot of help for people in addiction. There's a lot more now. There's a lot of different organisations and groups, and, you know, pretty much all of the government funded ones are not going to try and tell you need a spiritual experience. They're probably going to try and sort your mind out and help you to manage better. But they're probably not going to say you need a spiritual experience. they've been a lot more friendly to AA over the years, so that is an option for those that want to do that. I think they've even started other kind of courses that are non-spiritual experience that may work for some people. I can't deny or confirm that because I haven't got much experience around them, and I don't know a lot of people that go to all them other kind of groups that are doing well. So I can't say whether they're good or not. But this is saying that they believe that your problem is you need this spiritual experience. And it's saying, so obviously when it was sort of said to me that, you got a choice here, a spiritual life or an alcoholic death, I remember my mind was like, and the questions I was asking, well, what's an alcoholic death like? Before I make the choice. And my sponsor said, well, you've already been living that. An alcoholic death is a very slow, drawn out, humiliating, pitiful, shameful, incomprehensible demoralization over a long period, and at some point you actually then cease to exist. Or a spiritual life, which could still be a little bit like, oh, I don't know. Is there another way? Is there something else? I mean, I always like that story. I thought that was quite funny and probably worth telling at this point, where you got this guy hanging over a cliff, and it's an old AA story, but he's hanging over the cliff and he's hanging onto this branch, and this branch is slowly pulling out the cliff, and he's hanging there, and little rocks are falling out, and the branch is slowly coming out the cliff, and he knows he's going to fall, and he's crying out, please someone help, please someone help. And the clouds open and this booming voice comes out, I am Lord your God, let go. And the guy's like, is there anyone else there? See, and I like that, because again, that kind of another bit of that story is that the thing is, and again, I think this is what the program's also trying to say, but also there's this bit that, see, there's this perfect moment that in lots of areas of life, there is this perfect moment. And when we're hanging on, that perfect moment is when we let go, something grabs our hand. But see, that doesn't happen until you let go. It's like watching an Indiana Jones film the other night in the Temple of Doom, and he comes to this bridge, but there's this big cavern, but the bridge is kind of like a bridge of faith. And until he actually puts his foot down and starts walking, the bridge doesn't appear. And again, this is a kind of at the beginning, it's a bit like this. Once you get the hang of it, it's a lot easier to let go, because something different's going to happen, and you don't have to have so much faith once you've actually practiced this for a while. But again, for the people that are a complete agnostic and atheist, for myself, I probably was, I didn't know what I was. I wasn't educated enough to know what I was. I had just a really bad belief in God. I kind of did believe in him when I thought about it. No one really sat me down and said, have a good think about God before. But when my sponsor said, look, sit down and have a think about it, the version I had of God, I kind of told you wasn't very good. I kind of come up with this conclusion that I did believe in him, but he wasn't very good. And that, in actual fact, he was a bit of a tyrant, and and I knew that when I died and went to see him, he was going to pull the lever, and I was going to end up going to hell once he'd done the math on whether I was good or bad. And so it wasn't somebody I was really looking forward to meeting. In actual fact, I was trying to swerve him as much as I could for that reason. But as we go on, it says, but it isn't so difficult. So that's important for the people that struggle with the word God, is that it isn't so difficult. And it's kind of a little bit difficult for me to understand, what goes on in the mind of an atheist or an agnostic, because that's not my experience. So, and I don't know how you can really get this without the word God, but this is saying it can be done. So let's have a look at it. It's saying, but it isn't so difficult. About half of our original fellowship were exactly at that time. So going on that basis, I wouldn't, let's just say it's the same today, that 50% of the people that come into AA are going to be atheist or agnostic. But that means the other 50%, I've got to point out, are people that either believe in God or are religious. But it ain't working for them. So just believing in God isn't the solution either, is what this is telling me. So I think that's important to know. Because, see, so when you look at like Bill Wilson was, he was a stockbroker, he was an atheist, he liked science, he believed in the creation theory, not creation, what would it be, evolution. He liked science. He was very close-minded to the idea of God. And what set the ball rolling for him was his friend Abbey, who had been exposed to the Oxford group. Now, the Oxford group were a Christian sect that believed in certain ideas. One of the ideas that they believed in was that they aimed their evangelism at the richer people in society. And so Ebby Fetcher, who's in the AA history books, he was one of them people whose dad was very wealthy. He was a known face in the higher end of society. And so he apparently crashed his car through somebody's kitchen and he ended up in court. And it was, I think, the third strike and you're out. But the Oxford group were there because they heard he was being in court. And they come along to the judge and said, look, Ebby's a drunk. We've got this program, this four-step program. Would it be okay if you released him to us so he could try this program? So they released Ebby to him. They were more Christians and you had to believe in Jesus and that kind of thing. And so Ebby went along with that. Now, Ebby did get about, I don't know, don't quote me on the statistics here. It's one of the things I think I'm going to go back and have a little bit more of a look at. But he got a few months where he hadn't had a drink, which hadn't been his experience before. And then part of their program was to carry the message to other people. And so he knew Bill was a famous kind of stockbroker and rich. He knew he was an alcoholic. So he went to carry the message to Bill in his kitchen. And when Bill see him, and you can look at this all in the film, you know, the Bill Wilson story is a good film to look at because one thing about that film is it shows the different stages where the program is just coming through time, all the different little elements through the different people, through the different situations, and at some point they meet Bill. And slowly he starts to figure out the full program. Because these little bits of it are not enough. See, even though Ebby believed in God and he'd done some of it, he never stayed sober. But he carried the message to Bill, and then he told Bill, said, you know, he see him all lit up, and I see there's something different about you. What have you done? And Ebby said, I got religion. Bill didn't receive the message then. He went on into his drunken stupor as the time come. He then had this kind of, like he says in the book, that he had this kind of spiritual awakening where he see the presence of God, his mind changed, he felt like he realized that the God of the preachers were right. I think you can read about the spiritual experience in the book. I'm not going to flick to it in a minute. And so something changed in him, but again, that wasn't quite enough still. But I'm just going to read on and then we're going to look back at that story. It says, so about half of our fellowship were exactly that type. At first, some of us tried to avoid the issue, hoping against hope that we were not, again, here's that word, true alcoholics. And again, it kind of like, when you look at it that way, that if you're not a true alcoholic, then you're probably, what he's saying, a true alcoholic is that your problem is that you need this spiritual experience. So if you're not a true alcoholic, you don't need this spiritual experience. That you may be a heavy drinker, you may be connected to the spirit, and so you probably don't have to do this program because you're not trying to produce that spiritual experience in you. So So he's saying a true alcoholic, but after a while, we had to face the fact. So again, it's not even saying that you've got to stop drinking. They're saying you've got to stop drinking, which is pretty unacceptable to 50% of the people, and you've got to find God. So it's like, man, that's like a double whammy for some people. But it's like after a while, he had to face the fact that we must. Look, there's one of them musts that are not in the program. You know, there's no must. There's only suggestion, except there's a must. There's a few of them in here. Just going to point it out. It said we must find a spiritual basis of life or else. So that's what this is saying. If you're an alcoholic of that variety, and that you've got this spiritual disconnect, this spiritual malady, which is a spiritual disconnect, you're not going to get sober. You're not going to get sober. You're not going to stay sober unless you get this spiritual basis of your life sorted out. It's saying perhaps it is going to be that with you, but cheer up. Something like half of us thought we were atheists or agnostics. Again, that means half of the people must have believed in God, but they're still drinking and relapsing. So just believing in God alone isn't going to solve this problem. It obviously, again, what I take from that, you may take something else, I'll be glad to hear it, is that it's the way you believe in God makes a difference. But we did kind of talk about that when we talked about the 12 step. You can have a spiritual awakening, but not as a result of these steps. So there's a difference, and we may get to that as well as we tell you a bit more about the Bill and Ebby story and Bob's story. It says, for our experience, that shows that we needed not to be disconcerted. And that word means unsettled or confused. There's no need for you to feel unsettled or confused about what we're telling you here. It said, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life was sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. So I think, again, that's probably worth looking at, because, again, I think people do offer a higher moral standard or a philosophy of life, you know, a love of wisdom, getting a lot more wisdom, a lot more understanding. If you get more understanding of your condition, you know, that, and have high morals, that may be what's causing the problem. And certainly back then, you know, they had the thing called the temperance movement, and where they signed a pledge, but, you know, it didn't really work. And the people that were even Christian back then and trying their best to be sort of moral, you know, it wasn't working for them either. So I think that the reason that they're pointing that out, that, you know, in many ways that is a program that is offered today to be a little bit more moral and have a better life, philosophy of life, also gets offered as a program. But a lot of us have already done that, and then it still didn't work for us. So it said, but we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us. No matter how much we tried, we could not wish to be moral. And moral is a standard of behavior, the principles of right and wrong. So just trying to be better. I'm not going to do it this time. I'm going to behave better this time. You know, wishing to behave better isn't going to do it, even no matter how much willpower you put into it. You're not going to be able to wish yourself into better behavior with this problem. I'm going to drink only. We could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. So, you know, in that program, it's not going to produce the power that you're looking for. He said our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. So again, it's saying no human power could relieve your alcoholism, and that includes your own willpower. It's not in that part of you. It said lack of power, that was our dilemma. We had to find a power by which we could live, and it had to be a power greater than ourselves. So again, as we talked about that spiritual awakening and the steps being, you can have a spiritual awakening but still be in self, and you may get some relief from that, but it's not going to help you to grow spiritually. It's only when we work the steps and get free from self and then work the spiritual, then help people and do the service from being free from self, that's when we grow spiritually. So you can kind of be religious but still be very selfish, and there's not going to be a lot of power in that. But it has to be a power greater than this self, and that's what we're looking for, that this power that seems to be the greatest power in our life, which is self. Self is the greatest power in our life. We need to find a power greater than that. And it said, obviously, but where and how are we to find this power? And it's saying, well, that's exactly what this book is about. Its main object is to enable you to find a power greater than yourself, which will solve your problem. That means we have written a book which we believe to be spiritual as well as moral. And it means, of course, that we are going to talk about God. Here, difficulty arises for agnostics, atheists, and probably people that, I've always found that people that are sort of have a strong faith, that when they come into rehab, that they seem to think they already know all of that. And it's like, well, but there's no power in it, or you wouldn't be here in rehab and you wouldn't be drinking. So again, just having a belief in God isn't necessarily going to resolve this powerless problem. It said here, difficulty arises with our agnostics. Many times we talk to a new man and watch his hopes raise as we discuss his alcohol problem and explain our fellowship. But his face falls when we speak of spiritual matters, especially when we mention God. For we have reopened a subject which our man thought he neatly evaded or entirely ignored. We know how he feels. We have shared his honest doubt and prejudice. Some of us have been violently anti-religious. To others, the word God brought up a particular idea of him with which some have tried to impress on them during their childhood. And again, that's kind of when we do these groups on God. I like to start with that saying, the word apple, and then what colour apple come into your head? Was it a green apple, a red apple? Because I was talking about computers. So when you say the word God, like my sponsor said to me, what come into my head was, the guy with the big white beard on the clouds, and and then he said, well, what else? And then it was like, well, he lives in heaven, and there's hell, and then when you die, you go before him, and he calculates what you done wrong, what you done right, and if you did more good than you did bad, then you went to hell. If you did good, you went to heaven. Hell seemed like a place, all I could see pictures of it was like, a lot of, really white, bit porky people getting poked with forks. And heaven seemed to be angels, and neither of them looked that appealing to me, if I was honest. And but that was kind of all the understanding I had, apart from 3 a.m. when I thought my heart was stopping because I'm feeling like I'm overdosing. I would often pray and beg and never say I'll never do it again. And so that, he said, well, maybe you can have a rethink about it, and maybe think of a God that might be good, and go away and have a think. So that's kind of what I did. And so it says, some of us had been violently anti-religious, to others the word God brought up a particular idea. So it's good, even for yourselves listening to this, is to think, if this is the first time that you've kind of listened to this, is to maybe sit and have a think about what you've ended up with in your head. And do you even believe it? Because again, until I come into AA and my sponsor told me to actually consider it, I'd never really considered it. I mean, I probably had conversations about God, but, in the pub, it's almost like, we're playing a guessing game. Do you believe in him? Do you believe in him? No, I don't believe in him. No. But not based on any real information. And so that was the first time in my life I really sort of actually consciously considered, was there a God or wasn't there, or do I believe it or don't I believe it, or am I willing to believe in it? And I guess it comes to that as we find out. It says, perhaps we rejected the particular conception because it seemed inadequate. With that rejection, we imagined we had abandoned the God idea entirely. We were bothered with the thought of faith. We wasn't bothered with the thought of faith, and a dependence on a higher power beyond ourselves was somewhat weak, even cowardly. We looked upon this world of warring individuals, warring theological systems, and inescapable calamity with deep skepticism. We looked askance, and that word means suspicion or disapproval, at many individuals who claim to be godly. How could a supreme being have anything to do with it all? And who would comprehend a supreme being anyhow? Yet in moments we found ourselves thinking, on an enchanted starlight evening, who then made this all? There was a feeling of awe, wonder, but it was a fleeting and soon lost. Yes, we of our agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences, and let us make haste to reassure you that we have found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice or express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results. Now, so you've got Bill, he's had his big flashbang wallop experience in the hospital bed. The doctor's come up to him and he said to the doctor, "Do you think that I'm mad?" The doctor said, "Well, Bill, it's better than what you had. You should hang on to it." And so, but in that moment, that was when his mind opened. He become willing to believe. Before then, when Ebby come round, he kicked him out and said, "I'm not willing to believe. I don't believe in all that rubbish." But in that moment, that big flashbang wallop, it was the beginning of him become willing to believe. And then so he started to go off to the Oxford group, and they sent him out, and he went out for the next 6 months preaching the gospel of Jesus to down and outs. And, you know, after 6 months of that, he went back to his wife and said, "No one else has got sober." And so he hadn't got the program yet. He hadn't got the full program yet. He was just getting bits of it. He was just getting bits of it. So the journey that he went on, the journey in this book, is also the journey that he's trying to get you to move forward on. So he believed now, he was willing to believe, and he went out preaching the gospel of Jesus because that's what the Oxford group told him, and nobody else got sober. But then he went back to his wife, Lois, and said, "You know, like, no one else has got sober. I've been going around helping people on the streets, preaching the gospel. You know, I've got a favour." She said, "Well, Bill, you're still sober," which kind of set a light bulb off in his head. Again, that was another little bit of the puzzle. And then, so his mind is just beginning to open. Now, you know, your mind opening, it also needs some good information. And so then he's gone off on his business trip. And on the business trip, you know, he's not really got a good understanding of the program. All he knows is that when he goes and helps another alcoholic, it makes him feel better. And so even though he see God and had the flash of lightning, he's back there, he's in the hotel, the business trip hasn't gone so well, he's away from home, and that feeling of a drink starting to come back on him. And then what he's starting to do then is he's starting to think, "Oh, they told me that I'll go and work with another alcoholic." So he got the phone book out, he started to phone around, and he found a minister who said, "Oh, we got this Dr. Bob. He's an alcoholic. He's a real corker. I'll hook you up with him." So he went to see Dr. Bob. Now, Dr. Bob, see, he was one of them people that, he was an agnostic, he was an atheist, he was a Christian. And he believed in God, but he was still drunk. See, it's not what you believe, it's kind of how you believe. So you can believe in God and still be a drunk. You can believe in God and be a murderer. You can believe in God and be, you know, one of these people that it talks about that, you know, went and conquered other countries and killed people and slaughtered them. You can have a spiritual awakening, but it's not necessarily as a result of these steps. See, so he was one of that other 50% that it doesn't really talk about, that believe, but it wasn't working for them. So when he went to Bill, because there's another little important part of this process that was missing, that he went to Bill, to Bob, and Bob said to him, how are you going to help me? Everybody's been trying to help me. He's been doing the moral code, the philosophical code. He's done the temperance movement. He's gone to church. He's listened to this philosophy, that philosophy. He's a doctor. He says, what are you going to tell me? How are you going to help me? And this was another turning point in the fellowship, that Bill said this, and the doctor never heard this. He said, look, I've not come here to help you. I've come here to help me. See, when he was carrying the short message he had, he knew that that was going to help him. Now, Dr. Bob went, now his mind opened up a little bit. He went, I never thought of that before. Everybody's been trying to help me. I've been trying to get everybody to help me. I never thought about helping anybody else. And so something's changed in his mind. And that, see, look, what I believe is the mind of an alcoholic, the obsession that it talks about is a closed mind. Now, if we can't get that mind open, then that person's going to die in the dark. And so the doctor's mind has opened up a little bit more. But again, that didn't get him sober either. It just was another little step. He just become willing to believe something different. But it took him another, I think, again, don't quote me on the numbers, another 9 months before Dr. Bob got sober. Because he refused to do his amends. Because he said, if people know I'm an alcoholic, I mean, alcoholics think like that. They don't notice, everybody knows anyway. But if he actually goes around and admits it to people, that he was going to lose his business, and he was worried about that. And so the story goes that Bill took him to work one day and give him a couple of beers. He went into his office, and then at the end of the day, they went to pick him up, and he disappeared. And they thought he'd gone on a bender, but it turns out he went round and done all these amends. He'd done his step 9. And then from that day to his death, he never drunk again. And that was when the beginning of the program happened. See, they didn't put the date of the program for when Bill got sober. It was when Bob got sober. When the second person got sober, that's when they made that the beginning of the program. And then together they kind of went on, and we can look into that as we go on over the day, over next week maybe. But they found other bits to the program, and as they started putting them together. But the important big bit here is that they become willing. And that's the trouble with the people that are agnostic, atheist, or even people that think they've got a belief in God. And even though it's not working, I mean, I would say that the most difficult people to get through to, in my experience, have always been the really intellectual people, because they're just not willing to believe. And the really born again, kind of closed-minded, crazy Christians that you meet, because they're very closed-minded. If you think you know everything, then your mind's going to stay closed, and it's not going to open up to let this other side. And again, what them people all share in common is that they're still stuck in self. And until they get out of that self and find this power in themselves that's higher than themselves, then they're not going to be free from this problem. So again, when I become willing myself, and I went away and thought about it, and I become willing to look at it from a different angle, when I come back to my sponsor, and he said, have you got all I'm asking is that you become willing to open your mind to the possible existence of a God. And I said, all right, I'm kind of willing to do that. He said, have you got a God of your understanding? And I said, well, I don't understand much about God, but I kind of like the King Arthur films. And if God was like King Arthur, then I guess I'm kind of been looking for him anyway. He said, that'd do. Not that I thought God was King Arthur, but, you know, the attributes of King Arthur, to me, that meant that he was a good king. He cared about his people. And that even the round table, you know, sounded like, you know, it was like the AA that we all went out and helped each other. It kind of fitted. So that was the beginning then of my mind opening. And then that allowed me to start learning about God. And, you know, that's been an incredible experience. And from that day to this, it still is. Like I said when I started this podcast, it said, we found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we could commence to get results immediately, because as soon as you become willing, your mind starts to open straight away. And most people actually notice a difference pretty quickly, almost this quickly. You can feel the difference that quickly. In actual fact, whenever you're stuck in self and you're having an alcoholic drug addict death because you're caught in resentment and you're caught in self, remember, I don't think this is a drug and alcohol problem. I think drugs and alcohol just anesthetize the self problem. So when you're stuck in your God unspiritual self of resentment and fears and all of that, the moment that you're willing to let that go, poof, you feel better. It happens every day. It said it's best to keep your mind open and let it close and then get it open, and you learn, the more you practice a program, the more your mind stays open and develops. It says even though it was impossible for any of us to fully understand or comprehend the power which is God. And again, the more you learn, the less you realise you know. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another of God. See, again, it's just, you can believe whatever you like, as long as you're willing to move in that direction. It says our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient. Because the point is that we just become willing. However insufficient, inadequate or sufficient, to make that approach to effect a contact with him, as soon as we admitted the possibility of the existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe, underlying the totality of all things, we began to be possessed of the new sense of a power and direction. Provided that we took other simple steps, we found that God does not make too hard terms of those who seek him. To us, the realm of the spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive, or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. It is open, we believe, to all men. See, I think because addiction is probably the most closed-minded sickness that you can get, and it sort of makes sense to me that asking somebody to believe in God, ask a human being to even become willing to believe in God, there's nothing that you can ask somebody that's going to ask them to be more open-minded, to start to believe in this imaginary friend. Because again, it's that imagination needs to get fired up. You know, like as we looked at the on awakenings, that visualization, it's that using that imagination. That imagination's powerful. I think that imagination is actually at the, you know, and again, this is just what I believe, that imagination is at the root, at the core of creation. See, I don't think anybody discovered anything. Or no, sorry, I don't believe anybody invented anything. I believe people just discover what's already there. So I believe everything that you can imagine already exists in the mind of the universe, in the spirit, Everything you can imagine already exists. That light that we see in the brain scans, that in that light is all the information of the universe, the mind of God. Whatever that light is, we're totally dependent on it, because the darker our mind is, the worse our life is. The more light our mind is, the more a greater our life is, and the more ability we have. If that light leaves your body, we're what we call dead. That light, we absolutely depends on it for our very being. But I think in that light is all the information. So I think everything that you can imagine already exists. I believe everything you cannot imagine already exists. So I think like they use this, and they use it in a little while when they talk about the Wright brothers flying that plane, that really flying always existed in the mind, but it's only the dreamers. It's only the people using their imagination, because as they're using their imagination, they start building a neural pathway of something that doesn't exist. So if you sit and dream, your brain doesn't know whether it's actually happening or you're just imagining it. So when they start imagining, they start building pathways for things that don't actually exist in our physical realm. But if that matter isn't first developed, then that energy that already exists can't enter into our being. The mind can only come into matter. See, God is a spirit. He's not a physical thing. So until we start imagining that and start developing that matter, we don't start to experience it, because it says what used to be just thought starts to become an experience. So again, I believe this not just because it's written here, because I remember when I first read it, I actually experience everything that it says here. So I know for me this is truth, because it matches my experience. So as them guys kept moving the mat around through their dreaming, and remember, they just fixed push bikes. The greatest minds on the earth told them you can never fly. They were just dreamers. They were just using their imagination. And as they kept moving the mat around, eventually they got the matter into the right place. But everything was already there. They just discovered it. And then man could fly, and then the matter then just exploded. And then all of a sudden, well, from there to now, the amount of matter it takes to build a plane is incredible. But the amount of freedom that it's given us is incredible. But it also happens as well in the physical evolution, that they said you couldn't run a 3-minute mile. But the dreamers and the people that keep visualizing it and keep adjusting themselves to it and keep pushing into it, eventually then people did the 4-minute mile, sorry. And I'll have to check what the figures are on that, but I think last time I checked, they were down to like 3 minutes 40. I mean, do you not think it's funny that when you watch the Olympics every 4 years, that they keep shaving times off? You know, when's that? Is there an end to that? Is there an end when it's like, that's as fast as it? Because the quantum physics, the physics of possibilities, says there's no end to that. You've got 3 million years of neural, well, the potential of 3 million years of neural net in your brain. In your brain, there's 3 million years of potential neural net that hasn't developed yet. Now that's there for a reason, something new that you're going to need that at some point. That's being developed. As we're going through time, look, we're becoming a force in nature. Because as we're developing more matter, the more mind is connecting to it. The more spirit is connecting to it. So if you're alive for the next 3 million years and learn every day, I'm sure John's going to want to hear this with his essays, but if you're alive for the next 3 million years, you can learn all day, every day. So humanity is not even anywhere near the end of our evolution yet. There's all this mind still waiting to connect with the matter that hasn't come into our experience yet. And even that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to say, look, we've discovered this mind, this spirit, But if you're not willing to begin this journey of believing this, you're not going to develop the matter. And this mind can't connect to you. But as soon as you start to open your mind to this idea of God, you'll start finding this other power start coming in you. That your mind will start opening and you'll start noticing your life changing. And again, what we see on the outside is your life will start improving. That you're starting to become manageable in your own power. So again, I like that with the philosophy that we follow in the 12-step program in our Rehab, in my spiritual belief. We like to empower people. We think, look, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just not connected to the source of power. If we can connect you to that source of power, and then you can let your brain start redeveloping, we're not going to need to give you a council house. You can go and get your own house. You're going to go and get your own job. You're going to go and get your own career. You're going to start looking after your children again. You're going to start paying tax. Because that's what we experience with the people that tap into this source of power. Their lives start become manageable by them. That they become self-supporting through their own contributions. In actual fact, they actually start becoming people that contribute instead of taking. They start contributing to their families instead of being a deficit in their family. So it says, do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself, what do they mean? At the start, this was all we needed to commence the spiritual growth, to effect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. After we found ourselves accepting many things which we seemed entirely out of our reach, that was growth. But if we wished to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So we used our own conception, however limited. We needed to ask ourselves one short question. It seems like two questions to me, but we say it's one short question. Do I now believe, or am I willing to believe, that there is a power greater than myself? As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderful, effective spiritual structure can be built. Amazing. Amazing. I'll leave you there. Thank you.